And so in this 400 years, it is said that many of the books in the Bible were lost, and this, that, and the other. And only the Catholic Church recognized this time, calling it the Apocrypha times, the lost times. And so, from the Catholic Church standpoint, they collected the books and kept the history of that time in place to show you what took place and how things took place. But God didn't recognize this time because this time was pretty much a medieval time. That death and destruction was too great in this 400 years of time. But interesting enough, out of the 10 rulers, the Roman rulers that just carried out in a demonstrous way, there was an 11th ruler that came on the scene. And at the 11th ruler that came on the scene, this ruler was considered a religious ruler. And this ruler was by the name of Constantine. Constantine was a religious ruler. He was obsessed with religion, and he was obsessed with the study of religion. And as he came on the scene, Constantine saw much of the death and destruction that took place from the previous rulers. His decision was, by seeing how the Jews multiplied in this destructive mannerism of things, the death and destruction of things, he decided if we can't beat them, join them. So Constantine took up a position to give the Jews such a level of power and authority to operate in their Judaism, their religious manner, their religious practices of all things, gave them a section to which they can reside and live. But in the process of it all, the Jewish leadership was coming under control of the Roman government, and they did not want to be under control of the Roman government. They wanted a king for themselves, to which God gave them a king, and the king was Jesus. But they wanted an earthly king where they could see and wake up and touch and talk to every day. And when the Roman government came on the scene to take away, or not take away, but to control Jerusalem and the temple of Jerusalem, the Jewish community tried to put together an army to go up against the Roman government. Well, they didn't have a big enough army to go up against the Roman government. So eventually, the Roman government took over and took control of Jerusalem and the temple. And so this is how so many Jews were slaughtered, because the Roman government had took control. But the 11th ruler outside of that time was Constantine. He decided he was not going to slaughter. He decided he was going to join them. And he decided to set them up that they can exist in their own territory under Roman rule. So they were given a territory to exist. But Rome controlled. Rome still ruled and regulated. And in that, Constantine allowed the Jews to operate in their Judaism of religion and practice all their rituals, practice any of their religious activities, and go about their lives under Judaism. But he gave them a physical king outside of Jesus Christ. And the king to which Constantine set up as Caesar put forth Herod over the Jews. And that was their king, because they pretty much just was yearning and begging and shouting out loud for a king. Because all during the Old Testament, it was promised that a king would come. And the king that was promised will come and give them power and authority over the Romans. But that didn't happen. And that's another story. But we'll stay on our post and stay to the nature of where we're going with this. And so, what happened in the manner of all that religious practice of things, the Jews giving their authority by way of their leadership, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they began to develop a greater level of power and position amongst the Romans. And so they then brought forth and made a decision to come up with a national holiday. And the national holiday had to be a symbolic national holiday. And the symbolic national holiday that the Jews came up with was Passover. And what is Passover? Passover is when they were in slavery in Egypt. And as God ordered the 7 plagues in Egypt, he then divinely spoke to those plagues not to touch Israel, his people. That this plague were to go over Israel and not harm them. And so that was called Passover. And so they made that out of a celebration. And so with that, that became symbolic amongst the Romans. And the Romans were in transition of a war. Once the Romans took control of Jerusalem, they then became enraged or engaged in another war with another European colony of people called the Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxons were a nomad group of Europeans that had no land. They just lived in the hills and the woods and just slept anywhere they could. And so the Anglo-Saxons, they controlled nomad kind of land, and they also had celebrations as well. The Romans also took control of Greek culture, to which the Greeks then emerged with the Romans, making the Romans an expanded territory. Well, the Anglo-Saxons were against the Romans, and they weren't about to be ruled and regulated by the Romans, so they constantly went to war. But Rome had grew in numbers, and the Roman army began to slaughter many of the Anglo-Saxons. And the Anglo-Saxons then found themselves having to either continue fighting and die, or merge with Rome and help Rome to expand further. So the Anglo-Saxons did so. But the Anglo-Saxons had their own rituals. The Anglo-Saxons had their own celebration. And they celebrated a goddess. And their goddess was called Estera, S-T-E-R-A. And Estera was a sacrificial goddess, to which during the spring of the year, they celebrated the goddess Estera. The Jews during the spring of the year celebrated Passover. The Romans during the spring of the year didn't have much of a national holiday or celebration of things. So Constantine wanted to join in and be a part of having a national holiday, a symbolic holiday, and a celebration just like everyone else. So during the Anglo-Saxon celebration, they would sacrifice animals, chickens, goats, pigs, rabbits, being out in the wilderness of the thing. And rabbit was their primary delicacy, if you will. The Jews' primary delicacy was the lamb, slaughtering and sacrificing the lamb. The Romans' primary delicacy was a hog. They did much of slaughtering hogs. But Constantine wanted something of a symbolic nature to supersede Judaism. So upon Constantine slaughtering much of the Anglo-Saxons, they then migrated into Roman citizenry, and they became a part of the Roman army. and they brought their religious practices and rituals and all of that with them, along with Greece being a part of Rome. Everybody migrated in and brought their religious rituals and practices with them. So Rome becoming greater in numbers, and the leadership that grew in numbers, they brought about the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope as well. And so these religious leaders, and Constantine being a religious ruler, they began to think of a symbolic holiday that would supersede Judaism. And the symbolic holiday that they came up with is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Being as though the Catholic Church was in place, the Pope was in place, Constantine was a religious leader, and then the Greeks and the Anglo-Saxons had their own religious rituals, and so they brought about the resurrection of Christ from the Catholic Church perspective. But the other interesting thing is the sacrificial goddess of the Anglo-Saxons, Estera, they also added that in, calling or changing the name of the sacrificial goddess Estera to Easter. And that's how Easter came about. And then where the bunny and the egg practice came in is the Anglo-Saxons' primary food, their primary delicacy was the rabbit, sacrificing the rabbit. And so that being their primary, the rabbit became an official thing that was put in with Easter. And then they sacrificed chickens and so forth and so on, and the egg and all of that became a part of that festival as well. And that's why today, when Easter is about, everyone is celebrating, and then there's the rabbit figure in there, there's the Easter egg figure and all that stuff in there. That came from the Anglo-Saxons goddess Esther. And so this is where Constantine wanted to supersede Judaism and bring about a greater symbolic holiday, a national holiday from a Romanistic standpoint, because they didn't technically have a national holiday to go up against and compete against Judaism, Passover. So now, based on them establishing this symbolic national holiday, they were now able to stand up against Passover, having Jesus Christ as resurrected, putting and stamping the resurrection of Jesus Christ as a national holiday to go up against the Passover. But the problem with all of this is Jesus Christ, in all his deity, never ordained this festival coming into the new creed of the New Testament. All that festival and new moon festival and this festival and that festival and celebration was ordained by God during the days of Israel in Egypt. And God used those moments for sacrificial purposes to free Israel from sin. But then after a while, God denounced all those sacrificial purposes. Why? Because Jesus Christ was close to coming into the scene and bringing grace on the scene, that grace would be the covering for all man's sin. So now all this sacrificial and festival and new moon festival, Sabbath day festival, Easter, resurrection, all of that is meaningless to God. All of that is not ordained by God. All of that is religious practices put in place by mere human beings. And all of that, and the only thing that God or Christ, in a performance manner, while he was on earth, that he ordained for the church to continue in its practices of, is communion. because that was done by the hand of Christ amongst the disciples. And communion is to remember Christ and his sacrifice on the cross.